A few weeks ago, I asked if you guys wanted to hear more about how my husband and I budget, and a ton of you said yes. I thought it would be good in advance of this to make a video on personal finance more generally and some of the best practices that I picked up along the way, so I'll link that video down below if you want to check it out. But today we're talking all about budgets. I'll show you what my husband and I do, and then I'll summarize the takeaways at the end. Before I show you our actual budget, I thought it would be good to first talk a little bit about how our accounts are structured. Before we started budgeting, my husband and I managed our money at two completely different financial institutions. He used one bank, I used another. The way we would handle mutual expenses is that we each contributed half of our paycheck towards the mortgage and utilities, and anything left over went towards the principal on our house. So it wasn't the worst system in the world because we were always overpaying. However, that system did not account for bills like groceries or Netflix or vet bills. So we tried to sort of step up and pay for things whenever it felt like our turn, but at best the system was wildly inaccurate, and at worst it probably led to some low-key resentment on both sides. When we first started budgeting, our money was still in two completely different financial institutions, and trying to maintain a budget and move money around every month was a nightmare. So we finally said screw it and moved all of our money into one credit union and opened up a mutual account. Now we have a mutual emergency fund, a mutual checking account, a mutual vacation fund, and we each have our own emergency funds, personal emergency funds, and personal checking accounts. All of our money enters into the mutual checking account, and from there, it goes off to pay bills or fund the other accounts as needed. As for our actual budget, I'll switch over and show you what that looks like now. So here it is. All right, this is our budget. These are all of our real life line items over here on the left. I have changed some numbers in here for simplicity, but these are all of the things that we spend our money on every month. Now, I want to say right off the bat that our budget was designed with a very particular goal, which is paying off our house as quickly as possible. So at the bottom, you see our end of month mortgage balance. Everything else in this budget is all trying to drive down our mortgage balance as much as possible every month so we can pay off our house as quickly as possible. Now, the system that my husband and I use is called zero-based budgeting, which I'll explain more about in a moment, but I found that this is a really effective way to help us track towards a particular goal, in this case, paying off our house. So what else is going on here? On the left-hand side, every month we pay our regular mortgage payment, we pay our internet, we pay our main utilities, gas utilities, we spend money on groceries and eating out. I've mentioned before that we use cash for groceries and eating out, cat expenses, Netflix, Hulu, HVAC care, lawn care, vacations. If we have an upcoming vacation, then we are putting money into our vacation fund and we document how much money we're contributing every month towards our vacations in this line item. Pest control, car insurance, home security, ancillary. Ancillary is basically a fancy word for miscellaneous necessities. So if there is something that is mutual and necessary and it doesn't fall into any of these other categories, then we record it in the ancillary line item. And then my husband and I also have personal money that we get every month. So each month we add up our expenses and we add up the income that we each bring in, and then we subtract the amount of money that we spent from the amount of money that we brought in, and we get our net income for the month. Now, I mentioned that my husband and I do something called zero-based budgeting, which technically means that your income minus your expenses equals zero. This doesn't mean that we spend all of our money every month. This means that all of the money goes somewhere. We're using all of it for something intentional. So this amount left over needs to go somewhere. What we do currently is take the amount left over as our net income and put it towards our house every month. And then our net income equals zero. Just to sort of tie our financial goal into how we actually budget month to month, we also list our end of month mortgage balance at the bottom. So once we've made our regular mortgage payment and contributed more money towards the principal, we can then update the amount of money left on the mortgage balance at the end of that month. And that really helps us to sort of couple our financial goals with our actual spending and our behaviors. Now, one thing that you see here that doesn't actually exist in our actual budget is column G, where I designate whether or not that particular line item is variable. I think it's worth noting that many of these expenses are variable, and sometimes we have to take the cat to the vet. Sometimes we might have to take all three cats to the vet, and that can really chip away at what we're able to throw towards the house every month. But by allowing a little extra wiggle room for these variable expenses, we ensure that we're not tapping into our emergency fund when we do have variable expenses. I like to preserve our emergency fund for true emergency situations, things like the stock market collapsing, or if my husband and I both lose our jobs and we need to continue paying for necessities. So, allowing some little wiggle room for these variable expenses allows us to preserve our emergency fund for true emergencies. Another thing I want to point out is that we also list expenses that aren't necessarily paid every month, but expenses that may be paid quarterly or twice a year or annually, things like pest control, car insurance, and home security. And we also list out the amount that those expenses typically are. That way, when they come around once a quarter or come around twice a year or every year, we know how much we can expect to spend on those expenses. Finally, my husband and I do get some personal money every month. So each month we each get $500. Now, not all of this is just sort of fun money. This is where we pay for things like gas for our cars or our phone bills. My husband and I have separate phone bills, and so we are each responsible for paying those. Or if there is something fun that we want to buy for ourselves or buy for other people throughout the month, then this is where that money comes from. So if my husband wants to upgrade his computer, he can. If I want to buy an expensive moisturizer from Sephora, I can. And it comes from our personal money allocation for the month. Now, I think one interesting thing to note here is that we don't save whatever money is left over that we didn't spend from our personal monthly allocation. So if in August I only spent $200 of my personal money, then for the next month, we just top it off so that it equals 500 again. I would get $300 to raise that personal money allocation back up to 500. But neither of us are sort of getting $500 every single month and just saving that up indefinitely. And the reason we don't do that is that, again, this entire budget, this entire system is meant to allow us to contribute as much as possible every month towards paying down our house. So if my husband and I were just sort of hoarding $500 every month, then we aren't using our money in the most effective way to achieve our financial goals. Now, you may be asking, but what if you want to buy something big that costs more than $500? Well, that's a fair question, but we don't have large personal purchases like that come up very often. And if they were to come up, then we would just take that extra money we need and contribute less towards our house for that particular month. Now, if your shopping habits are not under control, I would not recommend this system, but since we don't shop that often and those situations are rare, I like this system because it means we're not collecting money indefinitely into a personal savings account for purchases that may or may not ever happen when we could be putting that money to better use by paying off the principal of our house. Finally, I added column H over here just to show you how we pay for each of these monthly expenses, and almost everything comes out of our joint checking account. However, groceries and eating out are two things that we pay for in cash. Now, part of the reason we do this is because we buy food all the time, and so if we needed to go through our debit card statements and add up all of our food-related expenses every month, that would be really tedious, and so paying for those items in cash makes it a lot easier to keep track of the amount of money that we've spent and how much we have left over. Another reason we use cash for food purchases is that food is technically a necessity, and so it's really easy to sort of justify all food-related decisions as necessities, and then we can spend a lot more money than we intend to on those categories. By paying for food in cash, it forces us to reconsider those purchases and really be intentional in what we buy. All right, that's our budget. Sorry you were looking at a spreadsheet for so long, but I wanted to show you the actual system that we've been using and the system that's working really well for us. At the risk of this becoming a very long video, what were some of the takeaways? Well, the first is to find a budgeting system that works for you. I mentioned that my husband and I use something called zero-based budgeting, and that has really helped us to focus in on very particular sort of isolated financial goals and make progress towards it. There's also an incredibly popular method called the anti-budget, which is where you designate what percentage of your money you want to save. You take that every month right off the top and save it, and then you can go nuts with the rest of your money. Whether you use zero-based budgeting or the anti-budget or something else out there, I think it's really important to find a budgeting system that resonates with you and works for your financial goals, so you'll stay motivated to stick to it. The second takeaway I want to highlight is that we no longer have generic savings accounts. Especially if you have a lot of debt, my personal practice has been to have an emergency fund and then make sure we're using all of that other money in some effective way. Before we started budgeting, we had little pockets of savings here and there, but we weren't using that money effectively. We weren't using it to pay off our cars or our house or investing it. That money was just sort of sitting there being useless. So getting rid of generic savings accounts has really helped us to make sure that every month we're using our money in the most effective ways to meet our financial goals. Now, I'm not opposed to having savings accounts for a particular purpose. We have our vacation fund, but if you're going to have a savings account, I really recommend you label it with a specific purpose, like a vacation fund, or maybe you're saving money for a small business, or whatever it is. Just give it a name. One, that'll help motivate you to put more money towards it because you'll know what you're working towards, and it will also help prevent you from sort of tapping into that fund for other things. Takeaway number 3 is to list out all expenses, even expenses that are only paid quarterly or biannually or annually. This may seem like overkill to list expenses that only show up on your budget a few times a year, but it can really prevent those expenses from just showing up and surprising you and taking a big chunk out of your budget. This can also serve as a good reminder to call up those companies and services to renegotiate whenever those bills come up to make sure you're getting the best deal. Takeaway number 4 is to use debit cards or cash. Don't rely on credit cards. Now, this should probably be pretty obvious, but credit cards abstract away the idea of money even more, and so we're more likely to spend more money when we use credit cards. There have been loads of studies done that show that people who use credit cards on average spend a lot more money than people who use debit cards or cash. So we have almost completely eliminated our use of credit cards. I personally hate paying for last month's expenses with this month's money, and so I haven't used credit cards for a while, but my husband took a little more convincing. But after a few budget meetings where he had to do some mental gymnastics to map last month's spending to this month's budget, he's agreed to only use credit cards for travel and large purchases if they come up. Speaking of budget meetings, the final takeaway is to regularly review your budget, especially if you're working together with someone else, to make sure that you're on track. My husband and I review our budget twice a month, and I won't lie, at first it was incredibly tedious to sort of move around our money and systematize our budget, but now that we've got it down, and it hasn't been that long, those meetings have become painless and even fun. They've basically turned into a meeting where we quickly review everything and then dump a bunch of money towards our house. And it feels good. Those meetings now feel good. They're an opportunity where we can see the progress we're making and remind ourselves that we're working towards a common goal. All right, if you're still here, congratulations. You made it to the end. Sorry this was such a long video, but I wanted to show you the system that we're actually using, the system that's been working for us, and I really hope that some of what we're doing can help inspire others to make better financial decisions and work towards your financial goals. That's it for me today. As always, thank you so much for watching. I hope you've enjoyed this incredibly long video, and I'll see you next time.